I'm not sure I've ever been so wrong on my first impression of a game. A half dozen hours into Mass Effect Andromeda, I made a post on the forum expressing my disappointment with the game, mostly echoing much of the other knee-jerk responses when it was first released. But I decided to stick with it for a while, accepting the departure from the original trilogy and allowing myself to get drawn into the new world. I'm glad I did. While some criticism of the game is warranted, bugs, facial animations, clunky UI, etc., I discovered that Mass Effect Andromeda also has a rich and detailed world with excellent voice acting and a story that improves as the game progresses, with some expected dips in narrative quality along the way. The combat has evolved over time with Mass Effect, but it seems to be humming nicely in the Frostbite engine. There is always room for improvement on things like the cover system and camera angles colliding with the environment in close quarters, but generally it's a lot of fun. This late into the game's release, I'm not writing this piece to give any sort of review or overview of the story, but rather to suggest that I think EA and BioWare may be sitting on a potential goldmine of opportunity if they are willing to explore the potential crossover of a single-player and multiplayer world in future development. BioWare has always teased us with elements of synergy between single-player and multiplayer, and I think with the Andromeda franchise they've reached a point where it may be time for them to look at something even more bold going forward. Whether single-player purists care to admit it, and I have counted myself as one on many occasions, some of the most enduring games on the current console generation are ones which incorporate tenets of the MMO framework, or at least an element of shared world experience. GTA, Destiny, ESO, and The Division have all gone down this road with varying degrees of success. I have played all four extensively, and I believe EA and BioWare should be next in line to develop a game which attempts to bridge a single-player and multiplayer experience in similar ways. I have no desire to see an end to the Mass Effect single-player story. BioWare has created some of the best written video games in history, and to see them abandon this side of their work would be a tremendous loss to the industry. However, as Rockstar showed us with GTA 5, there is room for a massive, entertaining story set in a richly detailed world, where the environmental assets can also be used to create a robust multiplayer world. When I look at the major planets that BioWare created for Andromeda, all I see is potential for them to serve as a template where dozens of locations could be added in the form of dungeon-style instances, where 4 players, or more, groups could explore and quest together, without interfering with the single-player story. Obviously, there are hard choices for developers when it comes to the overall framework. GTA, for example, separated the single-player and multiplayer worlds, allowing players to focus on one or the other, or both, depending on their mood and preferences. This certainly allows devs to sidestep many balance issues that Elder Scrolls Online and The Division ran into time and time again. But on the other hand, some players do enjoy using single-player builds to compete with others, something the Dark Souls community here can identify with. Based on what I've seen in Andromeda, I'm inclined to suggest that the two be separated in a way similar to Ryder's experience being separate from, but tied to, the Apex side of the game. The current multiplayer setup has a lot of upside as well. I played with a friend recently who hasn't had much time to invest, yet we could both dive in for a few quick matches with new characters and not worry about who is farther ahead in the story. Certainly a more expansive multiplayer would cause changes in this regard, so some thought would need to be put into how you might accommodate players with varying degrees of progress. But at least we've reached a point in game development where you have many other projects out there whose successes and failures might serve as a good model on which you can build. I've been playing video games for many more decades than I care to admit around people my age, and I've seen just about every trend come and go, sometimes sticking around and becoming almost archetypical. I rarely felt drawn to MMO games, and was only introduced to those basic elements with the console games I mentioned earlier. And while single-player content is paramount to my purchase decision, I can tell you that, as a consumer of games, blending the two in a way I outlined makes me exponentially more likely to buy them, simply because it adds so much longevity and replay to the title. I played ESO to death but rarely put it in my console anymore, yet I keep my copy because I know the day will come when I will get a sudden urge to dive back in. The goal of any game developer should be to create a world so immersive that while we players may put it aside at times, the urge to revisit it is never far away. And while this may only be a dream of mine, it's one that someday may materialize.